Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
Imam, we've been having some really incredible conversations inspired, by the way, by the book you just authored, The Imam and the Atheist. And I really appreciate the depth that you're willing to go into in these conversations as well. And so a question occurred to me that I hear often when it comes to questions about God and the existence of God and his relationship to the universe. It's that, the universe itself, we talk about it as if it has a beginning, but isn't it quite possible that the universe has no beginning?
I think everything that we've discussed so far assumes, and not wrongfully, that the universe is a contingent event, therefore the universe has a beginning. And we know now from science and physics, from the Big Bang Theory and stuff like that, and all the discoveries of modern science, that the universe does have a beginning. But I will actually walk you through some philosophical arguments and some arguments from science and physics as well that all point in the direction of a contingency of the universe.
Philosophy, science, not theology.
Philosophy and science. And I'm not even going to talk about the Big Bang. We'll talk about conventional science that has been around for hundreds of years, conventional philosophy that has been around for over 1,000 years, all pointing in the direction of contingency, or the fact that the universe actually began at some point.
Right, because we couldn't use the Big Bang because that is the potential beginning of the universe. We have to use something different to demonstrate that there is a beginning of the universe.
Right. And so the second law of thermodynamics, which has been around for hundreds of years, points us in that direction, because this law of thermodynamics basically says that the universe is progressively, constantly running out of energy. Okay, we know that about the universe, and it's very simple. If the universe is running out of energy and it has been around forever, then the universe would have actually run out of energy already. The only reason why the universe has not run out of energy completely is because it has not been around forever and it began to exist at some point. And that's why it still did not run out of energy until now.
If there's a limited amount of energy in the universe, but the universe can go back infinitely, then that limited amount of energy
we would have run out. We would have run out, definitely.
Right. Okay.
But this same understanding is also reflected in the general theory of relativity, because the general theory of relativity puts us in the direction of expansion. Not only that the universe is running out of energy, the universe is also expanding. Meaning that the universe is growing bigger and bigger and bigger in size. And again, the only reason the universe continues to expand is because it had a beginning. If the universe did not have a beginning, then it would have been static throughout its entire existence. This transformation, this change that occurs in the universe, again, without even talking of the Big Bang, which is a very, very strong perspective, scientific perspective, that the universe actually began at some point, we can still conclude from physics, from science, from chemistry, that the universe did begin at some point.
Okay, but physics is limited. It's limited by the limitations of science, what we can perceive, what we can test and experiment with. And we've talked about the limitations that come with that as well. Philosophically, how are we supposed to demonstrate this?
If the universe has been around forever, then the universe would have been infinite. Wouldn't you agree?
Right.
And if the universe, which is a material being, a material existence, has been around infinitely, then what we're basically saying is that actual infinites, not mathematical or abstract infinites, but rather actual infinites, do exist in the natural world. Wouldn't that be right?
Right.
Because the concept of infinity exists in mathematics, and we use it, as an abstract concept all the time. But is there any infinite amount in the physical world? Well, so far we haven't seen any. Everything that we experience in the physical world, in the natural world, is finite. There's a large number of sands. It would take us a long time to actually count, but it's still finite. And if the universe was infinite, we would have run into tremendous mathematical absurdities. Because infinity is accepted as an abstract concept, but it is not accepted. It's absolute, utter insanity and absurdity if it did exist in the real world.
Can you demonstrate one of those absurdities? How would it be absurd for there to be an actual infinite?
So there's this guy, his name is Hilbert, who basically demonstrated this concept in what is known as the Hilbert paradox of the hotel. He wanted to demonstrate that if actual infinites existed in the real world, there would be a lot of absurdities and the world would not make any sense. So he basically constructs this thought experiment in which he conceives of a hotel. This hotel has an infinite number of rooms, right? Because again, we're assuming that infinity does exist in actuality in the real world. So let's assume that it existed in a hotel, and this hotel has an infinite number of rooms. And so there is a sign at the door of the hotel that says every room is vacant, or we have vacancies for an infinite number of people, right? And
so, an infinite number of rooms.
Because there's an infinite number of rooms. So an infinite number of people came into the hotel and occupied an infinite number of rooms. That would actually imply that they need to put a sign that says, now the hotel is fully occupied. Right? So they did put that sign. And then this guy showed up in the lobby and, kept talking to the receptionist. No, please give me a room, give me a room. So the receptionist says, you know what, we're fully occupied because we have an infinite number of people in an infinite number of rooms. So she said, you know what, let me see what I can do. So she calls the manager, and the manager says, you know what, let's accommodate this guy. So they asked the guests. Every guest would move to the next room. So guest number 1 moved to room number 2. And guest in room number 2 would move to room number 3, all the way to infinity, right? In order to accommodate this guy, which, because we have an infinite number of rooms, could actually work. So this guy was very happy, and he occupied the first room. And then a bus showed up that has 50 people. And so the receptionist did the same and basically asked the first person to move to room number 51, and so on and so. So every guest would add 50 to the number of the room and then move to that room in order to accommodate the 50 people, on that coach. And then an infinite number of people showed up in the lobby, and, the very accommodating receptionist did the same exact thing, which means that after filling every room, we were actually able to accommodate another infinite number of people into the room. So if we post 2 signs at the entrance of that hotel, one of them says, every room is vacant and we can accommodate an infinite number of people, and another sign that says, every room is occupied, both signs would not be mutually exclusive. And that, Hilbert says, is absolute, utter absurdity. Therefore, the only way out of this is to assume that there are no actual infinites in the real world. So and that infinity is just a mental construct that we use for mathematics and so forth.
Mathematically, infinity plus 50 or infinity plus infinity is
still infinity.
Right. In the actual sense, it creates impossible realities.
And I'm proud to say this, Al-Ghazali, about 1,000 years ago, he actually propounded a similar argument that was actually very, very cool. He did not have to rely on, some imaginary hotel. He actually said, let's look at Saturn and let's look at Jupiter. If the universe has been around infinitely and beginninglessly, then the number of rotations that Saturn made around the sun and the number of rotations that Jupiter made around the sun would both be infinite, which means that they're the same. They've made the same number of rotations. But in reality, for every one cycle of Saturn around the moon, there is 2 cycles of Jupiter around the moon. And so
around the sun.
I'm sorry, did I say around the moon? For every rotation of Saturn around the sun, there would be 2 rotations of Jupiter around the sun, which basically means that Jupiter would be significantly ahead of Saturn in the number of rotations that they make around the sun. But if the universe has been around infinitely, then that is not the case, and it doesn't matter that one is double the other. What matters is that they're both infinite and they're both of equal value, and that is a mathematical absurdity.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is we understand now philosophically, we understand scientifically that the universe has a beginning, right? And we didn't have to even resort to theology, nor did we have to resort to the Big Bang. But it's still worth asking why is there something? Why is there existence rather than the lack of existence?
I mean, think about it. If there's no maker
Mm-hmm.
of this whole thing of ours that we call existence or we call the universe, which would have been more plausible? That there is something or that there is nothing?
Nothing would be far more plausible.
Right. Significantly, like exponentially, astronomically more plausible. Well, there was absolutely no maker in the first place. Why would anything exist?
Mm-hmm.
Why would anything come to existence? And so, I guess the way I look at it is that because there are contingent things that exist around us, there must be a cause for those contingent things.
Can't existence itself explain itself?
It would if we accept the premise that something might cause itself.
And we would not accept that premise.
I don't think we would accept that. I don't think if you look at your tablet, I don't think anyone would ever assume that the tablet caused itself.
So there's definitely there's an argument to be made here. Can we formulate the argument so that perhaps we can understand it step by step? That existence as an evidence for God.
So it's cause as an evidence for God, and this is called the cosmological arguments, and one of the most ancient arguments for God. The argument from cause. It's one of its earliest formulations was in Aristotle, but again, like I said many times, we owe so much of it to Thomas Aquinas, and by the way, Ghazali was in between them, and Ghazali also has a very, very interesting formulation of the argument that is called the Kalam, cosmological argument, which is becoming popular today. It's Kalam from the Islamic scholastic tradition. But I will focus on Thomas Aquinas' formulation of this argument, of the cosmological argument for God. Unlike the design argument, this one focuses on cause.
So let's go through the steps.
So Aquinas basically starts off with the question, does any contingent being exist in the universe? I mean, contingent means it's an object that depends in its existence on another object or another thing.
There's a contingent thing right there.
I would think. Yeah. I would think that the glass of water at least is a contingent object. I would think that the microphone is a contingent object. I would think that there's at least one contingent object around us, right?
Quite a few, yeah.
And so, the answer to this question is yes. So is there a contingent object in the universe? There is at least one contingent object in the universe, all right? So if there's at least one contingent object in the universe, then we are faced with one of two possibilities. It's either that object was, began to exist by itself on its own, or it began to exist as a result of the action of another object on this particular object.
A cause.
Right? A cause.
Yeah.
So what is the cause of that contingent object? Is it plausible for us to assume that the contingent object caused itself?
This would be ridiculous.
Most people would say no, I would think. And if the answer is no, it has to be an object that is not the object itself, right, in order to cause it, then we are left with two other possibilities. It's either that the cause is another contingent object, like, for example, the human being filling the glass of water with water,
right.
Or it is a necessary being, meaning a being that is incontingent, that is not dependent in its existence on anything else, right? Now, if we say that the contingent object was caused by another contingent object, then we would ask what caused the first contingent object and the preceding contingent object and so forth. And if we keep following this logic, at some point or the other, we're going to be stuck with what? With infinite regression. Right? So we're going to be stuck with infinite regression, meaning we're going to go into this infinite regress of causes, and the very first event has not occurred yet because infinity will go on forever. And again, we're back to the bottomless pit, type situation where we will never have arrived to the current event unless there was a beginning cause. Right? So the idea that a contingent object was caused by another contingent object has its limitations. At the end, we have to at least concede to the fact that the original cause must be a necessary being. And that necessary being is timeless, is immaterial, is uncaused and undesigned, and is personal and possesses a will on its own in and of itself. Last premise, the universe is a collection of contingent events and contingent objects. Conclusion, therefore, the universe must be caused by a cause, and that cause is not the universe itself, not anything in the universe, not another contingent cause. It has to be
a necessary being.
A necessary being, and that necessary being is God. Mic drop.
That's powerful. I want to just make sure we understand the steps to get there. So the idea is that there's something contingent that exists, and we can agree that there's so many things that are contingent that exist, and that if you look at the universe, it's the collection of all the contingent things that exist, and we've agreed that the best explanation for contingent things existing is a necessary existence.
An incontingent being.
Being.
To have caused them or caused them to begin to exist.
In order to avoid the infinite regress, which is so notorious and gets us absolutely nowhere.
That is the best way of formulating the argument,
So
I
the
think.
universe was caused by an incontingent being.
Right. And again, there is so many of those contingent objects that have been caused by other contingent objects. It's fine. Right. So I may start my conversation with the pen. And I would say that the pen was caused by the person that placed the pen on the table. And the person that placed the pen on the table bought the pen from the retailer.
Right.
And the retailer got the pen from another contingent object, which is the factory. And the factory got the plastic that made the pen from the guy that, from Chevron that dug the oil, from Saudi Arabia.
Right.
And then the guy that did this, so I can follow the series of contingent causes
Back through the dinosaurs and
back to the time of the dinosaurs. But at some point or the other, as I approach the origin and the beginning of the universe, I have to come to that point where I have to concede to an original cause. And this applies to every contingent object in the universe or every contingent being. I have to concede to an original cause that is a necessary being, that is incontingent, that is uncaused in and of itself.
it's almost as if we use the pen again as an example, you're teaching us that every single one of these contingent things, the pen or whatever else, may have many other contingent existences as part of the ingredients for which it exists now, but there must be one incontingent ingredient in order for it to exist as it does now.
Otherwise, there would be an infinite regression of causes, and that is, philosophically impossible.
So I think there are going to be various challenges to this formulation. It's a powerful one. But one formulation that I share because it comes from what would be considered reputable people like philosophers such as Hume and Bertrand Russell and even Stephen Hawking, who will say, why are we still asking about this? Why are we still asking about the cause of the universe? We should not be interested in this.
We should just ask about how and not why, basically.
We should be focused on the how, on the mechanisms.
And I understand that a lot of naturalists, a lot of philosophic naturalists, a lot of materialists, a lot of atheistic scientists, they would rather that we don't ask the why question. All right? I can't help it, however, that my mind still compels me to ask that question. The human curiosity does not end at the how, does not end at understanding the process. Human curiosity is compelled to ask the why. Okay, I understand how, but tell me why. Why did it happen in the first place? And so if I ask a scientist, tell me why, and the scientist says, no, you cannot ask the why question, you can only ask the how question, I will say, why? You're a scientist. I mean, you're supposed to be breaching the boundaries of knowing, and you're asking me to put a muffle on my curiosity and not ask the why question? Perhaps it's better for you to just say, hey, dude, I'm sorry, there is limitation to the scope of my knowledge. As a scientist, I can only answer the how question. Perhaps if you want an answer to the why, you need to go somewhere else. You need to go to philosophy. You need to go to theology. You need to experience God. And maybe he'll tell you why, but I can't. I think that would be a more humble response than asking everyone, hey, this is the one question that you should not be asking. I totally agree that science does not have an answer to why.
I think that the issue here is also that not all scientists, but those who are of the atheist bent, are making the claim that to ask why is a childish pursuit. You're asking the wrong question, and they're saying so that in a way to imply that you're being childish in the question you're asking, like you're throwing a tantrum.
But that is a statement that cannot be empirically proven either.
Yeah,
I think that's a dogmatic thing that a scientist would say, or a scientist with the atheistic bent, like you said, would say, and the rest of us would be hard pressed to hear that from a scientist.
Sincere philosophers should not settle for this.
Absolutely not. If the mind is asking it, then there has to at least be the possibility of answering it. If not now, then later.
Yeah.
Isn't that what scientists always say?
Right.
We may not have all the answers, but we will discover the answers later.
Right.
Why can't I ask the same question?
Yeah. By the way, that same statement also seems to imply that they will have the answers to the questions of why, but they're also at the same time saying that they're uninterested in the questions of why, and those questions cannot be answered. It seems illogical.
Which sounds like dogma to me.
Right, that does. So speaking from a philosophical angle, then there is another challenge to this formulation. It's famously referred to as the fallacy of composition. This is the idea that just because the parts of a thing have a certain quality, they have a certain way to describe them, it's not necessarily the case that the collection of those things, the sum of those parts will have the same quality. And oftentimes the example of a brick wall is given, right? That the individual bricks that make up that wall are quite small, but you can build a massive brick wall, a huge construction out of these small pieces. The quality is small, no longer is in the massive wall, even though that wall is almost entirely, maybe even exclusively made of bricks.
Right. And so this is used in reference to contingency.
Right, so because the universe it's made up of all these contingent things, but it's not necessarily the case.
But because those things are contingent doesn't necessarily mean that the universe is contingent.
The universe doesn't have to have that quality.
I want to go back to your example of the brick wall. Okay, so let's say that we've selected bricks, and those bricks are, number one, made of concrete, and number two, they're very small, and number three, they have sharp edges, and number four, they're all red. And then we build a wall with those bricks.
Right.
Can we say that out of those four qualities of the brick, that the wall shares some, if not, perhaps not all, but some of those qualities, right? So the wall is very strong, just like the brick. The wall is red, just like the brick. The wall is hard, just like the brick. The wall is red, just like the brick. But the wall is certainly not small, like the brick, and the wall does not have sharp edges, like the brick. So out of the, 6 qualities of the brick, the wall shares 4 qualities. So when we talk about the part and the whole, sometimes the whole shares some qualities with the part, and sometimes the whole doesn't share qualities with the part. And so when it comes to contingency, I think everyone would venture to say that that one quality of the parts of the universe is also shared by the universe itself. In fact, we can just replace the word universe and say, I'm talking about the sum total, the whole of all the contingent objects that exist around us. Because the universe is just the word that we use. I mean, David Hume himself actually says that the universe is a mental construct.
Right.
It doesn't really exist. Okay, I'm not going to use the word. I will agree with David Hume on this one, and I'm just going to go ahead and give in and say, okay, there is no universe. It is just this massive number that is still finite of all these contingent objects and beings all around us. And all of them are contingent, which means that their sum total is also contingent.
The sum total of all contingents. We can use that phrase over and over again instead of...
The sum total of all contingents has to be contingent, even if you don't use the word universe. That particular quality of the part must be shared by the whole. That is inescapable.
Yeah, this idea that David Hume, you just explained it, the idea of the mental construct, I think he's trying to question our ability to fathom the entirety of the universe and say that we're just applying our own perception on the universe. But but it's also true
It actually
that,
works against David Hume, or against the intentions of David Hume.
how so?
Because he is trying to do away with the concept of universe, because if the universe doesn't exist, then we don't have to explain why the universe began to exist.
Right.
But even if we removed the word universe, we would still have to ask, why is it that its individual components came to exist?
Right, and we can ask that about every individual component and
100%.
still need to come to the same conclusion.
And we will, if we keep pushing the question, it's either we go into infinite regression, or someone has to concede and say, okay, it was caused by an uncaused cause.
Yeah. So to avoid the idea of the infinite regression, we need to resort to this timeless, immaterial, infinite being. And we say that this is God. We give that being a name, we say this is God. Why should we stop our questioning there and not say instead, why not just say that something like matter or energy, that this is the very thing that is the necessary thing, the incontingent thing, and allow for that to be where we stop our questioning our infinite regress.
I think what you're referring to is what philosophers call brute fact. There is a reason why. So brute fact basically means a philosophical proposition that cannot and should not be argued with.
Right.
And the reason infinite God in the infinite regression context is a brute fact is because every contingent object may either have a contingent or an incontingent cause. Eventually, the cause of all objects at the very origin has to be an incontingent cause.
Yeah.
And so we say that God is that incontingent cause, and it cannot have a cause in and of itself, because if it did have a cause, then we go into infinite regression again.
Right.
And that makes it a brute fact. You just have to philosophically accept it, because there's no escape from it. That's why we call it brute fact. If you replace the word God with anything else, it would be something that is not immaterial, that is not timeless, that is not personal, that is not beginningless, that is not infinite. So if you say matter, which some scientists with the atheist bend, would argue, if you say matter is the brute fact of the universe, say, wait a second, well, matter was created at the Big Bang. Matter is material. Matter occupies space. Matter is time-bound. Matter certainly does not have a personality or will of its own to cause anything, let alone itself. So matter, or anything else for that matter, right, cannot be brute fact. Only an immaterial, infinite, personal God can be the cause, therefore is the brute fact.
Yeah, matter, energy, these elements, they meet none of the criterion for which we need in order to call this the incontingent or the necessary.
Absolutely not.
Yeah. I still want to make sure that we understand this idea of the brute fact and why we shouldn't just stop at matter, right? Because that is kind of the first refutation as well. Stop asking beyond the Big Bang kind of a thing. To say, to philosophically to give matter the quality of being the brute fact, it's just laziness, right? Because you can question matter further.
And you can ask what caused matter.
Right, and it wouldn't lead, that itself would not lead to an infinite regress. Whereas to ask that question about the infinite, timeless, immaterial existence or the incontingent, that is what leads to the infinite regress.
And that is a great way of putting it.
Right. Okay, there's another challenge, and this will come from the likes of Hume and others as well, that we have only experienced an extremely tiny portion of the universe, of the known universe. Right? That's all we've witnessed. And while it's true that within what we've seen here, we see these causal patterns, but it's not necessarily the case that these causal patterns will hold up in some other remote corner of the universe. So why should we use this cause, these patterns of cause, to explain the origins of the universe?
So yeah, Bertrand Russell and others, make that argument that, causality, which we experience in our part of the universe, may not necessarily be common in the universe. Maybe it's just right here. We haven't experienced the universe, he would say, in order to make extrapolations and generalizations about it. But I mean, here's the thing. Imagine that someone was born in a prison cell, and that person lived and died in that prison cell. If you ask that person, before that person died, never seen anything, never been to Brazil, never tried pasta, never been married, never had children, never went to restaurants, never, been on a scooter, never been to the ocean, nothing. And if you ask that person, did you experience planet Earth? What will that person say?
And they experienced their portion of it.
That person would say, well, I did not experience some of the fun activities of planet Earth.
But they certainly lived on planet Earth.
But I lived on planet Earth, and I breathed oxygen just like everybody else. I was subjected to the laws of gravity just like everybody else. I had clothes on like everybody else. My digestive system worked like everybody else. My nails grew and I had to trim them like everybody else. I was able to speak like people. I was able to breathe like people. I was able to pluck my nose or pick my nose, whatever, like everybody else. The fact that you did not experience every part of Earth doesn't mean that you did not experience Earth.
You did experience Earth.
You did experience Earth. And the laws and the rules that govern Earth still govern your experience, as trimmed and incomplete your experience may have been. Yeah, I did not go to constellation Lyra. I did not travel to Andromeda in order to experience the rest of the universe, right? I did not see, all the, in person that is, all the incredible planets and the incredible star systems that the telescopes have shown us, that NASA has shown us. But we have absolutely no reason to believe that the physical laws would change. There would have been one slight evidence to this. Everything that we've studied about the universe so far tells us that the laws are the same, that the rules are the same, that the gravitational force, the cosmic singularities, that these constants are all the same across the board. And so it would require faith, actually, to hope for a place in the universe where causality plays no role.
Yeah.
On what basis? So are we supposed to ignore all the evidence that supports causality and just cling to the hopeful, faith-based possibility that maybe there is a place in the universe where there's no causality? Like, that just sounds very implausible to me.
This is a bit of an aside, but I feel like it's worth looking into at this moment. It's come up a few times before as well that there seem to be some very faith-based, and sometimes you've used the word dogma, some very dogmatic claims coming from the very people who are supposedly attacking faith, the very people who are supposedly attacking dogma. Why? Why are they doing this, and why are they affording themselves the right to do that?
I don't know. I don't want to go into their intentions. I have no idea what emotions or what thought process drives it. But if you remember from one of our previous conversations, we talked about how science is often dubbed as or portrayed as very objective. Follow the facts and so forth. And people who follow faith or believe in the unseen are the ones that are looked at as superstitious and dogmatic. When in our experiences, in our dialogues and conversations with people who are atheists, more often than not, they make very, very dogmatic statements, and then we actually cringe. Like, even people of faith cannot make some of those statements that they make. Yet they make those. It almost feels like, rather than saying God doesn't exist, I hope that God doesn't exist. I'm trying to find a reason to convince you that God doesn't exist.
Right.
And that just is definitely troubling to me. It doesn't mean that I would stop engaging them or question their intentions or assume that they are acting maliciously. I hope that's not the case. But it does baffle me as it baffles you.
Yeah. It reminds me of this, I think it was a meme somewhere or something that you want me to believe that there was nothing, and then nothing brought out something, and then in that something there was this massive space, and in that massive space there's one tiny planet, and in that one tiny planet there's this one species that unlikely became the dominant species. I just don't have enough faith to believe something like that, right? that all of this came from nothing.
Exactly.
Yeah. I think another important challenge, another important refutation perhaps for this cosmological argument is that it's really founded on the idea of causality. And causality, we kind of talked about this just now, but it is possible that causality is also one of the relationships, one of the things that came into existence with the existence of this universe. So as the universe starts, and along with all these other laws of nature, causality is one of them, right? And so we cannot use causality then to explain, the origins of this universe.
This is actually, in my opinion, one of the most serious challenges to the cosmological argument, and one that I would take very, very seriously. We still have a great response to this one,
Yeah.
and I still don't think that this refutation is valid, but it's one I think that garners my respect a lot more than others. Let me, before I answer this question, let me pose this to you first. Atheists and the naturalistic narrative, right? Philosophic naturalism argues that all human knowledge is derived from the natural world, right? Which means it all started with the Big Bang. It all comes from the universe. Now, if we are able to demonstrate that there are forms of human knowledge that are derived not from the universe, wouldn't that, in an indirect way, point in the direction of God?
It would point in the direction of a being from which that came.
Exactly. Otherwise, if it's not coming from the universe, then where does it come from? So we will talk about this in future conversations, obviously, when we talk about morality and so forth. Even math, for example, is this type of knowledge that doesn't necessarily come from the observable universe, and we're going to talk about that a lot. But I want to go back to causality, all right? Because if I can establish that the ability to discern cause is not derived from the universe, then it is not of the universe. That means it comes from outside the universe, and that refutation would basically fall flat on its face, and then it would point in the direction of a being that created everything. And here's the thing: let's take, for example, the acorn and the oak tree. Right? Which one caused which?
The acorn caused the oak tree.
And then the oak tree causes the acorn, right? In this
an infinite regress of oak trees,
but yet it's not infinite, right? Because at some point or the other, something else caused the very first acorn.
Right.
But if you're a monkey, well, I shouldn't say that. That sounds disrespectful.
It's okay.
If someone is a monkey, if we have a monkey and that monkey sees the acorn and sees the oak tree, the monkey actually lives on the oak tree and builds its entire life around the oak tree and eats the acorns.
Right.
Experiences the oak tree every day and experiences the acorns every day. Here's the cause and effect right there in front of your own eyes. Yet, would the monkey be able to discern the causal relationship between an oak tree and an acorn?
No, the monkey doesn't get it.
The monkey would the hippo get it?
The hippo certainly doesn't get it.
Would the buffalo get it?
None of them do.
What about the squirrels and the frogs? Well, the squirrel in particular has a very intimate relationship with the oak trees.
Its life depends upon these
100%, and sees that every single day. Yet, no one can discern a causal relationship between the acorn and the oak tree. No one except
us,
except human beings. That is, only us would have that added intellectual faculty that would enable us to look at the causal pattern. The causal pattern does exist in nature, independent of us, right? It's there. You can see it every single day. Rain makes a water puddle.
Right.
You can see that every single day. But only us would make a connection between the cause and its effect. There is a causal pattern in the universe, but then there is a causal inference
that we make.
And the causal inference is a capacity of the mind. It's a capacity of the mind that is basically part of our ability to think abstractly and our ability to reason. And I will talk about that extensively when we use reason as a case for God. But if causal inferences exist in the natural world, if causal patterns exist in the natural world, causal inferences only exist in the mind. And we would have to ask, where does a causal inference come from? Why are we not just like the monkeys and the squirrels, experience it and use it to our advantage without necessarily connecting A to B? A is the cause and B is the effect. Unless this causal inference as a mental faculty was given to us by somebody else and not the natural world.
And just, I want to be sure, does the causal inference have to be correct? Or is it just the ability to make the inference? Even
It doesn't
incorrect?
have to be correct, by the way, because we make the wrong causal inferences all the time. It's just the desire of the mind to ask the question, what brought this to existence?
Yeah.
That desire of the mind cannot be quantified. It certainly doesn't come from the world.
Yeah.
There is, I can have an image of an acorn in my mind, and that image is corroborated by the actual acorn in the real world.
Right.
But in this particular case, I have a thought process in my mind that compels me to ask what caused this object, which is called causal inference. And this thought process is not actually corroborated by its real life, real world counterpart type thing. All that exists in the world is this disjointed objects, cause and effect. I have to apply my mental faculties and create that causal connection between them. The causal process is in the natural world, but the ability to ascertain that causal process only exists in the mind, and it's not derived from the natural world, which means that it comes from somewhere else.
I want us to be sure that, because you mentioned that it exists in the mind, and the mind, the brain, these are sometimes interchangeable. Squirrels have brains, and sometimes they seem very clever. I want to be sure that the squirrels are not themselves making causal inferences, and we can clarify. So the squirrel knows that at certain seasons, the squirrel knows that it needs acorns. It wants the acorns, right? And acorns seem to fall in a certain season, right? And so they'll collect the acorns in that particular season, and they seem to have even built like patterns of their own lives around these seasonal changes and stuff. How are we certain that those are not causal inferences and they're just causal patterns?
Because the squirrels would never think of the impact of collecting acorns on the environment. The acorns would never think of the morality of stealing an acorn from a neighboring nest of squirrels. Squirrels cannot think in any abstract sense. They use the causal inferences because they are now...
They use the causal patterns.
I'm sorry, they use the causal patterns.
Right.
They use the causal patterns to their advantage because now they are accustomed, now they are primed to the idea that in this particular season, the more I collect of these acorns, the better my survival, my survival abilities or whatever. They don't necessarily understand why.
Yeah.
And they certainly don't understand if I take the acorn and place it in the soil and nurture it and water it, that it would grow into an actual oak tree. They would
never do that.
Otherwise, they would have done that.
Right.
If survival, goes to the extent of developing these, causal inferences, then I think, the world would have been a very different place. Yeah. Only us can do that.
Yeah.
I will say, I need an oak tree, therefore I'll get an acorn and plant it so that it grows into an oak tree. But animals certainly cannot do that because that is the ability to think in an abstract fashion.
Yeah, yeah. I think these have been settled. Just on a lighter note, you mentioned monkeys. I do think that in one of the future conversations we are going to talk about monkeys and apes and the origins of man, yeah?
Evolution always makes for an amusing case against God, and so it is often presumed that we are all descendants of apes, so we're going to have to settle that beef.
Looking forward to it.
All right.
Thanks
Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.